Which of the following statements about overloaded constructors is true? Remember that overloaded means having basically more than one version or more than one way that you can call that method or constructor. Having then overloaded constructor means that we have more than one way or more than one version that we can create the object, so that we can pass in different data depending on, do we want to create it and pass in an int, or do we want to create it and pass in a string and an int? So we can pass in different values. Or maybe have a constructor that doesn't take in any values, so that we can use a default constructor, so that even if we don't know the data that we want to pass in to create the object, we're still able to create a default object. So the constructor for a class can be overloaded and must have different number of parameters, or the order that those parameters show up, or the types, the data type for the parameter must be different. So this is the true statement. A is incorrect. It says constructors for a class can be overloaded, but they must all have different names. Well, for overloaded constructor, actually, they will have the same name, and a constructor must match the same name as the class. So actually, all constructors will have the same name. They will all be the name of the class, but they're not different by the name. They're different by the parameter, either the number of parameter, or the order that those parameters show up, or the data type for the parameter must be different. C is also incorrect. Constructors cannot be overloaded. That is not true. You can actually have more than one version for constructor, so that you can construct objects in multiple ways using the same class. And last, D is also incorrect. It says constructors for a class can be overloaded, but they must have different number of parameter. They don't necessarily have to have different number of parameter. Let's say they have the same number of parameter. Like I have, a constructor sample, and it takes in an int, only one int, x. And then I have another constructor sample, and it takes in, and I define it, and it takes in only one value. We can even name it the same parameter because it's a local variable anyway. But this one is going to be a string. So now, even though the number of parameters is the same, they both sample version here to construct, version 1 and version 2, both take in just one parameter. But the first version takes in one int, whereas the second version takes in one string. So the data type is different. So they can be different number of parameters, like one only takes in one input and one takes two input, but it doesn't have to be, as long as either the order is different or the data type is different. So one of these three things has to be the case, that either the number of them, the order that they show up, or the data type.